It would seem that Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, the current sitting president of Ukraine, has taken a quick momentary break in his heroic efforts to go against the Russian military after their invasion. This is, of course, through the lens of the mainstream media as they frame the entire situation regarding Russia and Ukraine. But he has seemingly took a quick stop uh, performing his heroic efforts as they're characterized by the U.S. mainstream media and their leading politicians, as well as their Western allies, to direct his fury no longer at the Russians, but at, here we go, the working class of Ukraine, in passing a new anti worker law. So, this is an article from Open Democracy that gives us basically the crux of what's going on here. And this is extremely important because this is something that we see very often in times of war, in times of peril. And of course, we'll get into all of that. So, this article from Open Democracy details the following. On the 17th of August, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky ratified Law 5371, which removes rights for workers at small and medium-sized companies. It will be effective for as long as the country is under martial law, a qualification added at the last minute under pressure from trade unions. Under the new law, people who work for firms up to 250 employees will now be covered by contracts they negotiate as individuals with their bosses rather than the National Labor Code. In practice, this means that around 70% of workers in Ukraine have been stripped of many labor protections. Collective agreements negotiated by unions over salary or holidays, for instance, no longer apply. The law also removes the legal authority of trade unions to veto workplace dismissals. The Ukrainian government has claimed it is trying to alleviate the difficulties faced by companies in wartime. However, it first tried to introduce the new law in 2021. Ukraine's ruling Servant of the People Party argued that the extreme overregulation of employment contradicts the principles of market self-regulation and modern personal management. The policy is opposed by Ukraine's Federation of Trade Unions and has been criticized by a joint European Union International Labor Organization project. Some of its critics argue that the government is using Russia's invasion as an excuse to push for deregulation and the stripping back of social support. In July, Natalia Lomonosova of Ukrainian think tank CEDOS told Open Democracy that those were long-term policy goals of Zelensky's government, likely aimed at attracting foreign investment. Law 5371 is not an isolated measure. In July, two other laws were passed. One allows employers to stop paying workers who have been called up to fight, while other legalizes zero-hour contracts. The latter will remain in place even when martial law is lifted. Another draft bill proposes a drastic overhaul of Ukraine's labor code itself. This would introduce a maximum 12-hour workday and allow employers to dismiss workers without justification. The Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine is launching a challenge to Law 5371 in the country's constitutional court and is appealing to the ILO and other international bodies. They argue that martial law prevented them from calling protests and strikes to oppose the legislation. Wow. So the great heroic leader, as of course has been characterized by our mainstream media, these are not my words, these are theirs, has taken a break, at least for the moment, in fighting the evil, Hitlerian enemy that is indeed Vladimir Putin, that's leading the evil, diabolical country of Russia. And he has turned his fury against his own working class, his own people, the vast majority of them, and really sticking it to him, really sticking it to the people, the unions, and all the hard-earned policy wins that they fought for. So I just want to go through a couple of things that stood out to me. Under the new law, people who work for firms up to 250 employees will now be covered by contracts they negotiate as individuals, keep that in mind, with their bosses rather than the National Labor Code. Why is this important? Why do I want to hone in on that one paragraph? Because in this society where capitalism is the leading economic system, where capitalism is what Ukraine practices, much like the most of the rest of the world, The organization of production is set up in such a way where a few people basically own and run the business at the top, and they use the labor of the vast majority, their brains, their muscles, their energy to essentially reap the benefits of what they can provide to the few people that own everything. And so, what this says is that they'll be covered by contracts they negotiate individually with their bosses. I got news for you. If you want to be a one lone person trying to negotiate with your boss, you've already lost because, as I just described to you, in this current economic system, the employer holds all the power and the employee essentially holds none when he's alone. Okay, when he or she is an individual, which is why unions is something that people do what workers do when they want to get a leg up, when they want to get that raise, when they want to improve working conditions, they come together. You see, this individualization, that word is difficult to say, of the working class is what can bring harm to them and what does and what will, as long as these policies such as this exist. And so, something like a national labor code is extremely important for workers, especially in a society in which the leading economic system is what it is. But this is something that we've seen before, and it, to my knowledge, was characterized by a woman by the name of Naomi Klein. She wrote a book on it. I recommend you read it. It's called The Shock Doctrine. And in this book, she talked about something specifically called shock therapy. And it's essentially what we're seeing in Ukraine and what we've seen in this country on many different scales in many other countries around the world, of course, at times, many times perpetrated by the United States itself. Shock therapy, it's this thing where in times of peril, in dire times, times of war, times of cataclysmic disasters like a hurricane, we saw it during the Bush administration and their nonsense. But the state and private enterprise, in many cases, rush in to enact this permanent change during times of distress where the population is pretty much all over the place. So there's a lot of privatization going on here. They're talking about they're doing this because they want to invite investment. Okay, they basically want to privatize things that are public. Basically, essentially, do what the large population doesn't want them to do. If this wasn't, in their case, a time of war, but now that it is, they can pretty much get away with it. It reminds me of when we got the news that they were just outright banning opposition political parties, like left-wing parties in Ukraine, just got banned. Any kind of opposition party got banned, and they were basically taking away any sort of political discourse that the people could, by and large, engage in. And this is another tactic, though they're upping the antes a little bit, going at the working class here, going at the regular Ukrainian worker. And this isn't something that they just did. They talked about in this article how they first tried to introduce this in 2021. As far as I know, they weren't at war with Russia in 2021. So this is nothing new for the Zelensky government. Of course, this is all backed by the United States and their allies. This is simply a price to pay for the pipe dream of joining the hostile military alliance that is NATO. Of course, if you would like to ally yourself with the United States and their allies, you have to support their policies and adopt their ideology, which is neoliberalism. And it goes to show you why they hate countries like Russia, why they hate countries like, a better example, China, because China has learned through trial and error that if you would like to be a modernized, successful economy, which they are, you don't necessarily, not even necessarily, you don't have to at all adopt the ideologies, the tactics of the United States government. You don't have to. You can go your own way. You can do your own thing. Of course, that'll earn you the ire and the degradation and the hate of the United States, and they'll do everything in order to topple you, to stunt your growth and all the rest of it. We're seeing it right now as it pertains to Taiwan and many other things, and just their outright policies against places like the People's Republic of China. But overall, this is extremely unsettling development I should say, as it pertains to Ukraine and the Zelensky government. Of course, the mainstream media are going to stay far away from this because they're too busy painting him or hailing him as some sort of great heroic figure that's fighting against the new great evil that is Vladimir Putin. So I would suspect that you probably won't hear much about this from mainstream media, but I thought it was important to talk about it here because any situation in which the worker is suffering is always necessary to speak about because we are by and large the first ones on the chopping block when any harm is to be done.